From new sightings of Bigfoot on the Appalachian trails,
Please, let's get out of here.
people finding out why you should never attempt filming Bigfoot, to Sasquatch sightings leading to tragic events. These are a few of the worst encounter stories, all gathered in this one big video. I'm Alex, and I hope you will enjoy this.
Please, let's get out of here.
The eyes are open, they are fixed on the camera, and across every second of the footage they do not blink. This is not a shape in the fog. It is not a trick of a branch and a shadow. A married couple says this is what was standing in the woods, watching them, on a remote trail they had never taken before. And before they backed away, they got it on their phone. They told us the way it held that stare wasn't curiosity, it wasn't fear, it was the stillness of something that had already decided not to lose sight of them. It just stood there and watched, long seconds. They stared back, neither side moved. And here's the part that gets under my skin, the part I keep coming back to. Before they ever saw it, the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. That dead air that witnesses have been describing for 100 years right before one of these encounters. The people who filmed this were not thrill seekers. They were an ordinary hiking couple, experienced enough to know the one thing you do not do when something is watching you in the woods. You do not run, so they didn't. They walked slowly, deliberately,
Please,
while something they never once heard followed them all the way out. And that's the first mystery. If it followed them through thick brush without snapping a single twig, what kind of animal moves like that? But there is a second mystery, and it might be bigger because this is not the only thing filmed in these mountains. There's other footage of what looks like the same kind of creature that did the exact opposite. It ran. One stood its ground and stared like a hunter. One fled like prey. Same mountains. Why?
Two pieces of footage, two faces, two completely opposite reactions, and one stretch of old, silent forest that has been swallowing people for over half a century. But to understand what these two pieces of footage might be showing us, we have to go back to the trail and to the wrong turn that started all of this.
Before I go any further, I owe you the truth about where this came from, because the trust on this channel matters more to me than any single video. This came to us from a viewer, an email, a recording, and a story. We were not there. We cannot independently verify that the footage is genuine, and I am not going to stand here and pretend we can. What I can tell you is that we are giving these people the benefit of the doubt, laying out exactly what they sent us and exactly what they said, and letting you be the judge. You always are. I say that at the start of a video like this every time, and I am never going to stop, because the moment a channel like this one starts dressing up maybes as definitelys, it is over. It has become exactly the thing the skeptics already think we are. So here is my promise to you, the same as always. Where I know something, I will tell you I know it. Where I am guessing, I will tell you I am guessing. And where I have no idea, which on this subject is often, I will look you in the eye and say so. The mystery is interesting enough on its own. It does not need me to lie to it. With that said, let me tell you about the couple. They are a husband and wife, regular hikers, the kind who spend most good weekends somewhere with dirt under their boots. They know the southern Appalachians of western North Carolina the way some people know their own neighborhood, the country around the Great Smokies and the Nantahala backcountry, ridgelines and laurel thickets and creeks the color of strong tea. They had a usual route, the trail they always took, the one they knew turn for turn. But that day, for no reason either of them could fully explain afterward, they decided to take something more remote, a fainter path, branching off and away from the route everyone else uses, pushing deeper into a part of the forest they had never walked. And I personally think that detail is the one people underestimate. Because almost every account like this, the ones that end with something staring back, starts the exact same way. Somebody leaves the trail everybody else is on. Somebody takes the route they never take. It is like the encounters live in the gaps, in the quiet seams of the map where almost no one ever goes. Think about what a maintained trail actually is. It is a thin ribbon of human noise running through a landscape that is otherwise enormous and empty. Boots, voices, dogs, the rattle of trekking poles day after day, year after year. Anything that wants nothing to do with people learns the trail the way a deer learns a highway. It learns where the people are. And it learns just as surely where they are not. So when you step off that ribbon and onto a fainter path, one that sees a handful of boots a year instead of 1,000, you are not just changing your route. You are crossing out of the part of the forest that has been taught to expect humans and into the part that hasn't. You're walking into territory that for all practical purposes belongs to whatever lives there. They didn't know any of that in the moment. They just knew the new path was prettier, wilder, quieter. They knew it climbed away from the noise and into old timber, big trees, the kind of cathedral hush that is exactly why people fall in love with these mountains in the first place. They were enjoying themselves. That is the part that always gets me. These things never begin with dread. They begin with a good day. They didn't know it yet, but they had just walked into one of those seams. It came on gradually, and then all at once. Roughly 10 minutes past the turn, the wife noticed it first. The woods had gone quiet, not peaceful quiet, not the soft hush of a calm afternoon. Quiet like a held breath. The birdsong that had been with them all morning had simply stopped. No insects droning, no small things rustling in the leaf litter. Just their own footsteps, suddenly far too loud. And then the feeling, that one everybody who has spent real time in the woods knows and nobody can quite explain. The feeling of being watched, arriving in the gut, a long moment before the eyes have anything to go on. Here is what I want you to understand about that silence, because it is not just atmosphere. It is one of the single most consistent details in the entire body of encounter reports. Over and over, witnesses describe the forest switching off right before something happens. The animals know first. The birds, the squirrels, the insects. They go still and silent when an apex presence moves into the area, the same way a watering hole empties when a big cat comes down to drink. And there's nothing supernatural about that part. It is just biology. Prey animals survive by reading the room, and the room they read is mostly sound. A songbird's whole life depends on knowing instantly when a predator has entered its airspace. So when the woods go quiet, it is not nothing, it is information. It is 100 small animals all making the same calculation at the same time. And the calculation is, be still, be silent. Do not draw the eye of the thing that just arrived. Which means the silence the couple walked into was not the woods relaxing. It was the woods bracing. Every living thing around them had already registered something they themselves could not yet see. The couple were, in a very real sense, the last ones in that forest to find out they were not alone. The couple wasn't thinking about any of that in the moment, of course. They just felt the wrongness of it. The wife said later it was like the volume of the whole world had been turned down, and she couldn't figure out who was holding the dial. And it is worth saying plainly that this exact detail, the dead air, the sudden hush, shows up in case after case that has nothing to do with each other. Different decades, different states, different witnesses who never met and never compared notes, people reaching independently for the same handful of words. The birds stopped, it got too quiet, the woods went dead. When the same strange detail surfaces from people who could not have copied it from one another, I pay attention. Coincidence has a shape, and this isn't it.
And so many of you have left comments describing this exact thing. The woods going dead, the volume dropping, the animals vanishing right before the moment everything changed. Keep leaving those comments because the pattern is too consistent to be a coincidence, and reading them is part of how I keep learning what this is. But the single most reported warning sign in these encounters isn't a sound, it's the absence of a sound. The forest goes silent first, and then you see it.
They almost walked right past it. It was the husband who stopped. Something in the corner of his eye, a shape that was the wrong shape, a stillness in the brush that was too deliberate to be brush. He put a hand on his wife's arm, and they both looked. And there it was, watching them from a distance, partly screened by trunks and a tangle of foliage, far enough up the slope that they could not make out every detail. But far is not the same as hidden. They could see it. They could see the dark mass of it. And most of all, they could see the face, and the face was looking directly back at them. That is when the husband fumbled out his phone and started recording. The footage is what you would expect from a man whose hands are shaking, zoomed in hard, jittering, the autofocus hunting in and out. But through all of it, the face stays there. It does not duck away. It does not break and run. It just keeps watching. And the eyes, they told us that across the entire time they stood there, locked onto it, it did not appear to blink. Not once. I want to be careful here and tell you only what they described, which was not some catalog of features at that distance, but an effect. The effect of being looked at by something that was not going to look away first. The feeling of being pinned in place, of being measured. The wife said it didn't feel like an animal noticing them. It felt like an animal that had already been watching them for who knows how long, finally letting them catch up to the fact. Like a hunter that has its quarry in sight and is simply deciding what to do next. And, she said, almost afraid to look away, afraid to lose them. I want to sit on that last part because I think it is the most important thing either of them told us. There are two very different ways a wild thing looks at you. One is the look of a creature that has just been startled, that did not know you were there, all wide-eyed alarm and the muscles already coiling to flee. We have all seen that look on a deer. The other is the look of a creature that knew exactly where you were the whole time, that has been holding still and watching and is now simply waiting to see what you will do. That second look is the one that empties the blood out of your hands, and that, they said, was the look they got. And here's a small thing that I cannot stop turning over. Why didn't it run? Set aside what it was for a second. Almost everything large and wild in those mountains, a bear, a boar, a big cat, will break and leave the instant it realizes a human has locked eyes with it. That is the default. That is survival. The animals that are still alive in a world full of armed people are, overwhelmingly, the animals that flee. So a thing that does not flee, that stands in the open and holds your gaze and makes you be the one to leave, is either too confident to be afraid of you or curious enough about you to override its fear. Neither of those is comforting. Both of them suggest a mind doing something more than reacting. I have said it before on this channel, and I will say it again. The eyes are the thing. The eyes are what separate a maybe it was a bear story from the handful of accounts that genuinely keep me up at night. A bear glances at you and goes back to what it was doing, or it leaves. A bear does not hold an unbroken, unblinking stare across a clearing like it is reading you. Whatever was up, that slope was doing something a bear does not do. There's a sound on the recording from the voice of the wife saying, "Please, let's get out of here." That is the moment for me that the whole thing stops being a blurry shape and starts being real. Because here is the thing about fear. You can fake a dark figure in the trees, you can throw on a costume, you can edit a clip, you can stage a shape at the edge of the frame. People do it all the time. But the involuntary fear in a person's voice, the way it cracks and drops and goes quiet when something has genuinely frightened them, that is much, much harder to perform. And there is something in the way she says it that I find very hard to listen to and write off. It is not theatrical. It is not for the camera. It is a woman quietly asking her husband to please get her away from whatever is looking at them. And notice what they did not do. They did not scream. They did not bolt. Both of them understood, the way experienced outdoors people do, that running is the worst possible move. Running tells a predator that you're prey. Running triggers the chase. So instead, against every animal instinct firing in their bodies, they made themselves do the hardest thing. They turned slowly and they walked. If you have never been in that position, it is almost impossible to describe how much that takes. Every system in your body is screaming at you to run. Your legs are flooded with the chemistry to do it. The whole ancient machinery of your nervous system, built over millions of years, is shouting one word, and the word is go. And you have to override all of it with the thin, cold voice of reason that says, if you run, you die. You have to walk away from the most frightening thing you have ever seen at the pace of a Sunday stroll, because your higher brain knows something your body refuses to accept. They did it. Both of them. And the fact that they kept their heads, that they did the textbook correct, profoundly unnatural thing, is one of the reasons I tend to believe the rest of what they say. People who are making up a story for attention tend to make themselves the hero of a dramatic chase. People telling the truth about real fear tend to describe doing something small and sensible and quietly terrifying, like walking when they wanted to run. This is the part of their account that I cannot stop thinking about. Not the face, not the stare, this. They walked out nervous, fast but controlled, glancing back over their shoulders toward the slope where it had been standing. And as they walked, both of them became certain of something. They were being followed, not because they heard it, because they didn't. And that is the horror of it. Think about where they were. A thick, mature Appalachian forest. Deep leaf litter, dry sticks, dense understory. The kind of ground where the two of them could not take 3 steps without crunching and snapping, where their own progress sounded to their ears like an elephant crashing through. In a forest like that, anything that moves makes noise. That is just physics. That is just the woods. And yet, behind them, there was nothing. No footfall, no branch, no rustle of leaves being pushed aside. Total silence. But the feeling, the certainty, the prickle on the back of the neck never let up. They were sure, both of them separately, that something was pacing them through the trees. So sit with the 2 possibilities, because both of them are unsettling. Maybe they imagined it. Maybe the fear from the stare just rode them all the way back to the car, and nothing followed them at all. That is possible, and I will not pretend it isn't. Or maybe they were right. And if they were right, then whatever it was is a master of moving in complete silence through terrain that should make silence impossible. Something large enough to leave a face like that in the trees, moving through dry brush without disturbing a single leaf. That is not how a bear moves. That is not how a deer moves. That is not how a person moves. I genuinely do not know what moves like that. And it is worth dwelling on just how hard that is, because we tend to underestimate it. Go out into a dry autumn forest sometime and try to move 20 feet in total silence. You can't. I can't. Trained hunters in soft boots, moving inch by inch, taking a full minute to cross a small clearing, still snap the occasional twig. Now scale that up. Picture something that might weigh 400, 500, 600 pounds, moving at the speed of 2 walking adults through that same crackling understory and making no more sound than a held breath. The strength to stealth ratio of that is almost incomprehensible. It would require not just size, but an intimate, bodily knowledge of the ground, where the soft moss is, where the bare rock is, where to place a foot so the leaves don't speak. The kind of knowledge you only get from a lifetime spent in one stretch of forest, learning it the way you learn the floorboards of your own house in the dark. And that, more than the face, more than the stare, is the thing that tips me toward believing something real was there. Because that is not a detail a person making up a story would invent. A liar gives you crashing branches and pounding footstep and a monster roaring through the woods because that is what's scary in the movies. The couple gave us the opposite. They gave us nothing. Silence. And silence, done that well by something that big, is so much worse. And I personally think the silence is scarier than the sighting. A thing you can see is a thing you can track, a thing you can point at and name and watch. But a thing that follows you and makes no sound at all is something else entirely. It means it has chosen to be unseen. It means the only reason you ever saw its face in the first place is that, for a few seconds, it let you. And it means that on every other hike, in every other quiet stretch of woods you have ever walked and felt perfectly alone, you have only ever had its word for it that you were.
In a forest where they couldn't take a silent step themselves, they heard nothing behind them, but both were certain they were still being followed the entire way out. There was more in the message than just the recording, and I think it matters, so I want to share it with you the way they shared it with us.
They told us the feeling never fully let go. Even after the face was out of sight, even as the trees thinned and the real trail came back underfoot, the sense of being watched stayed with them the rest of the hike out. It only lifted, the husband wrote, when they were actually back at the car with the doors shut. They told us they argued for days about whether to send the footage at all. The wife was worried no one would believe them, that they would be laughed at, that strangers would tear apart a few shaky seconds of video and call them liars or fools. She has not wanted to go back to that section of forest since, not once. And they told us they very nearly deleted the whole thing, sat there with the recording open and a thumb over the trash icon because keeping it felt like keeping a door open to something they would rather close. In the end, they kept it, and eventually they sent it to us. That is exactly the kind of thing this channel exists for. The accounts people are afraid to tell anyone else. So I'm going to ask you directly, if you have had an encounter, something you have never been able to explain, something you have maybe never even told the people closest to you, send it in. And if you were one of the rare few who managed to get something on camera, footage, a photo, anything at all, that is gold and we want to see it. We read everything that comes in. We protect anonymity whenever it's asked for, no questions, no exceptions. And the recordings you send are exactly how videos like this one get made in the first place. And I want to say something to the people who are sitting on a story right now, thumb hovering, talking themselves out of it. I know why you haven't told anyone. I know you are picturing the look on their faces. I know you have spent years quietly deciding it was a trick of the light, because that is so much easier to live with than the alternative. But every single one of these accounts, including the one you just watched, only exists because somebody finally decided that being disbelieved was worth less to them than the truth getting out. This couple almost deleted theirs. Think about how close we came to never seeing that face. Whatever you saw, it counts. Your account is a data point in something much bigger than you, and the only people who ever get to the bottom of anything are the ones who refuse to stay quiet. You are the reason this is possible. So if you've got a story, find the channel and tell me. I mean that. Now I want to do something that I think this footage forces us to do. I want to talk about the people who go into these same mountains and never come out. Because if there really is something in this corner of the country that can pace two grown adults through thick brush without making a sound, that can stand and watch and then vanish, then we have to at least ask an uncomfortable question about the cases the official record can only ever call lost. Let me tell you about two of them. Both real, both documented, both never solved. The first is a little boy named Dennis Martin. June of 1969, in the Great Smoky Mountains, the same range these hikers were walking. He was 6 years old, out with his father and grandfather and brother on a long-standing family camping trip, up along the high country near Spence Field, a meadow bisected by the Appalachian Trail. The boys had a plan. They were going to split up, circle around, and jump out to scare the adults. A harmless prank. Dennis stepped off to take his position, slipping behind a low screen of brush. It was a matter of seconds. When they looked for him to spring the surprise, he was simply gone. What followed was, to this day, the largest search operation in the history of the park. It started with the family, then rangers, then it swelled, day by day, into something almost unbelievable. Around 1,400 people at its peak. Volunteers, National Park Service personnel, even U.S. Army Green Berets who turned up to comb the backcountry. Over 1,000 helicopter sorties flown across some of the most rugged terrain in the eastern United States. And here is a detail that will sound familiar after everything I just told you about that couple. Within hours of Dennis vanishing, a heavy, violent storm rolled in over the search area. It flooded the streams, washed out the access, and destroyed any scent the dogs might have followed. The weather turned against the searchers almost as if on cue, a pattern that eerily shows up in case after case like this. They searched for over 2 weeks. They found nothing. No clothing, no shoe, no trace, no body. A healthy 6-year-old vanished behind a bush in good weather in the middle of his own family, and more than half a century later, not one shred of him has ever been recovered. There were strange footnotes, the kind these cases always seem to grow. A man miles away reported hearing a sickening scream that afternoon and seeing a rough, unkempt figure moving through the woods. Years later, a ginseng hunter claimed he had stumbled on a child's skeleton in a hollow some distance off, but said nothing at the time because he had been breaking the law to be there. And when the spot was finally searched, there was nothing. Every thread, when pulled, came apart in their hands. The second is a woman named Thelma Melton. Most people called her Polly. September of 1981, Deep Creek Trail on the North Carolina side of the Smokies. And here's what makes her case sit so strangely. She was not a novice. She had hiked that exact trail for nearly 20 years. She knew it cold. It was rated easy, a well-traveled, populated path. She was out with 2 friends on ground she had walked hundreds of times. On the way back, she picked up her pace. Power walked ahead of her companions in good spirits, one of them calling out that they wouldn't want to be in a foot race with her. She laughed, turned, and kept her quick pace. She crested a low hill on the gravel path and dropped out of sight on the far side. A minute, maybe 2, behind her, her friends came over that same hill. There was no Polly, not on the trail ahead, not resting on one of the benches where they expected to find her catching her breath, not back at the campground, gone in the span of time it takes to walk over a small rise. And when the bloodhounds were brought to the spot where her friends had last seen her, the dogs reportedly circled and would not take a scent. They howled and turned in confused loops at the exact point she had disappeared, as though she had walked over that hill and simply stopped existing. There were the same strange grace notes here too. Uncharacteristic behavior in the days before. A phone call she made that no one could account for, the only time in years anyone had known her to use that phone. A woman who, her family insisted, would never have walked off into the deep woods of her own free will, who was in fact afraid of the snakes that filled them. Now I'm going to be straight with you, the way I always try to be. These are real unsolved cases, and they have real conventional theories attached to them. The Smokies are vast and brutally rugged. There are sinkholes and bluffs and deep crevices and 100 ways for the terrain itself to take someone and never give them back. There is the possibility of foul play of a person, in Dennis's case especially. Smarter people than me have studied these cases for decades and landed nowhere certain. I'm not standing here telling you that a Sasquatch took Dennis Martin or took Polly Melton. I don't know what happened to them. Nobody does. That is the entire maddening point. But I will ask the question that the footage from this couple put in my head, and I will let you do with it whatever you want. We have account after account, going back generations, of something in these mountains that is huge and silent and so good at not being seen that grown adults argue about whether it exists at all. We have just heard from a couple who swear something paced them through dry brush without making a single sound. And in those same mountains, people vanish in seconds in fair weather on familiar ground, leaving the dogs turning in baffled circles and the searchers with nothing at all to hold.
I personally don't think it's crazy to wonder whether, even once, even in a single one of these cases, those two facts have ever quietly been the same fact. I am not saying they are, I am saying I would like to know that they aren't. A 6-year-old vanished behind the bush in front of his family, a woman crested a hill and was gone in under 2 minutes. Same mountains, never found.
Here's where the story takes a turn I did not expect when the couple's email first landed. Because while we were researching this, going through everything connected to that region, we came across other footage, 4 images said to come from the same stretch of mountains. And the moment I saw them next to the couple's recording, something jumped out at me that I want you to see too. The lighting is completely different. The couple filmed their creature in flat-screened forest light. This other set is shot in brighter, more open daylight, a different time of day, what looks like a different camera entirely, a different film stock. These are not frames from the same clip. These came from somewhere else. Now, I want to be careful here because the internet is a sewer of fake Bigfoot images. I treat all of it as guilty until proven interesting. But these 4 sat differently with me, and not because they are clearer or more dramatic. The opposite, actually. They are the ordinary kind of bad. The kind of bad that real footage of a real animal taken by a real startled person actually looks like. And when I lined them up against the couple's recording, I wasn't looking to connect them. I was just looking. And that is when I saw it. But that is not the part that stopped me. This is. The face is not the same. Look at them side by side and it is right there. Different bone structure, a different brow, a different overall cast to the features. The creature in the couple's footage and the creature in these 4 images do not look like the same individual. They look like 2 different beings of possibly the same kind. And if that is true, then think about what it means. We are not talking about an animal. One lone thing haunting one patch of woods. We are talking about more than one of them. We are talking about a population, which when you sit with it is the only way any of this could ever make sense. Because here is a problem that has nagged at researchers forever. For a creature to persist, undetected, for as long as these have been reported across this much territory, there cannot be just one. A single animal lives, ages and dies, and the story dies with it. For the reports to keep coming, decade after decade, generation after generation, there has to be a breeding population. There has to be many, enough to keep the line going in the deep folds of the country where almost nobody ever looks. And people hear that and say, well, that's impossible. You cannot hide a population of giant creatures in the modern United States. But I would gently push back on that. We routinely fail to find animals we know for a fact are out there. Whole species have hidden in plain sight. Mountain lions were declared gone from huge stretches of the east for decades, and then they started turning up on doorbell cameras. We find new large animals, real, flesh and blood, scientifically cataloged animals, more often than people realize, and we usually find them in exactly this kind of place: remote, forested, folded. The eastern mountains alone hold millions of acres where a person could walk for days and never cross a road. You do not need a hidden world to lose something in country like that. You just need country like that, and we have it. So the idea of two different individuals photographed in the same range is not a complication to explain away. It is, if anything, the single most important thing in this whole video. Because one creature is a ghost story, two creatures is a species. And there are few ways to read two different faces from the same mountains. Maybe they are a family, a clan group, and we know from countless reports that these things are described traveling together, more than one at a time, adults and smaller ones moving in loose groups. We have talked on this channel before about sightings of groups rather than loners and how that detail keeps surfacing in the most credible accounts. Maybe it is regional variation, the simple fact that individuals in a population look different from one another, the way no two human faces are alike, the way you could pick your own brother out of a crowd of 1,000 people. Or maybe it is exactly what you would expect if you finally accept the premise that there are enough of them out there for you to film two in the same range, in the same season, and have them be complete strangers to one another. And that brings us to the strangest contrast in this entire story. The two recordings don't just show two different faces, they show two completely opposite reactions to being seen. The couple's creature stood its ground. It held the stare. It did not flinch. It did not flee. It watched them with that unblinking, predatory patience until they removed themselves from the situation. That is the posture of something that is not afraid of you, something in control. The creature in the four images is doing the opposite. In those frames, it appears to be moving, low and fast, possibly caught in the act of fleeing. The body language of something that has just realized it has been spotted and wants, more than anything, to be gone. To break contact, the posture of something that wants no part of you at all. So why? Why would two creatures of the same kind in the same mountains react in such totally different ways to the same situation, a human catching sight of them? And the more I think about it, the more I believe the answer is the most human answer there is. They're individuals. Think about temperament. Put any intelligent animal in the same situation 100 times and you will not get the same response 100 times because intelligent animals have personalities. Some are bold, some are timid, some are curious to the point of recklessness, and some want nothing but distance. Think about age and role. A big, dominant, mature adult, secure in its size and its territory, has every reason to stand and stare down two soft, slow humans who wandered into its woods. A younger one, or a more cautious one, has every reason to run the instant it is seen. And here's the idea I keep circling back to, the one that I think is the real heart of this. These are supposed to be a lost branch of the human family tree. A relic cousin, something close to us, walking upright, watching with forward-facing eyes, intelligent and aware. Well, if that is even partly true, then of course they would differ from one another as much as we do. because we are not one thing. Drop a stranger into your path in a dark wood, and you will get 1,000 different reactions across 1,000 different people. Some would freeze and stare, some would flee, some would approach, some would threaten. We are bold and timid and curious and hostile and gentle, all of us in every possible combination, because we are individuals with inner lives. And if these creatures really are our distant kin, then the most natural thing in the world would be for one of them to hold its ground like a king and another to bolt like a frightened child. And there's a deeper layer to this that I find almost beautiful in an unsettling way. The thing we use more than any other to decide whether something has a mind like ours is exactly this: unpredictability, personality. A rock reacts the same way every time you push it. A simple animal runs a fairly fixed set of programs. But the closer a creature gets to us, the more it surprises us, because the more it is running on something like choice. We recognize kin not by how alike we look, but by how unalike we behave, by the sheer ungovernable variety of it. A troop of chimpanzees is full of distinct personalities, the bully and the diplomat and the schemer and the gentle one, and we recognize them as near people precisely because of that. So if you showed me 100 of these encounters and every single creature reacted in the exact same way, I would actually be more suspicious, not less. The variety is the fingerprint of a mind. Western North Carolina is, by the numbers, one of the more active corners of the country for this. The mountains here have logged more than 100 documented sightings over the decades, scattered across dozens of counties, most of them never making it past a local newspaper or a researcher's case file. Take a man named Jeff Carpenter. He is not a showman or a hoaxer chasing clicks. He is a Jackson County native, a lifelong outdoorsman who learned to hunt and track and read the woods from his father. A man who spent decades running the county parks department before he retired. In other words, exactly the kind of credible, grounded, knows the difference between a bear and a bush witness you would want. Back in 2008, Carpenter heard something in the woods at 2 a.m. 2 enormous howls, sounds he said matched nothing he knew, nothing wild and nothing domestic. In the years that followed, he kept finding things, trees twisted in ways no wind does, tracks, enough that this skeptical, practical mountain man eventually became an official field investigator, documenting other people's encounters across these same hills. He went in a skeptic. The woods changed his mind, and that is the texture of it out here. It is not one viral clip. It is a long, low, steady hum of reports going back generations from hunters and campers and people sitting on their own back porches at dusk. Families who found enormous footprints around their tents in the morning. People who heard the howls roll down off the ridges at night and never forgot them. People who saw something cross a logging road in their headlights, upright, far too tall, gone before their brain could finish arguing with their eyes. Most of them never tell a soul. They have jobs and neighbors and reputations, and they know exactly how it sounds. And the Cherokee, who knew these mountains long before any of us, had their own names and their own stories for things in the deep woods, hairy and man-shaped, and best left alone. You can decide for yourself what that means, but I find it hard to wave away the fact that the people who lived most intimately with this landscape for thousands of years did not treat the idea of a large, hidden, man-like creature in the high forest as a joke. They treated it as a fact of the terrain, the way you would treat a river or a bear. Which is why when an ordinary hiking couple sends me a few seconds of a face in the trees and a recording of a frightened woman's voice, I don't laugh, because I know they are not an outlier. They are the newest entry in a record that this part of the country has been quietly keeping for a very, very long time. A record written mostly by people who had every reason to stay quiet and told the truth anyway. It comes from the left, big and unhurried, and the moment its body crosses the sensor line, the camera kicks on and starts recording. 11 seconds? That is all we get. 11 seconds of something tall and covered in hair walking slowly across the frame in the middle of the night. It does not run, it does not flinch at the camera. As it crosses, it comes up against a tree in the foreground, close to the lens, one long arm and a hand against the trunk. And then it carries on, off to the right, out of frame, and the 11 seconds run out. That is the footage. And the man who set up that camera, the man who sent me this clip, has not answered an email in 3 weeks. I want to be careful here because this one is personal in a way most of the stories on this channel are not. The person who filmed this is not a stranger who posted it on a forum. He is someone I've been talking to for a long time, quietly, over email. He never wanted attention, never asked for anything, never tried to sell me a thing. He is the opposite of the guy who films a blurry shape and screams that he has proof. He is the careful kind. And this is not the first clip he has sent me. That is the part that has been sitting in my chest for weeks now. Because the last time we talked, he told me something that I have not been able to shake. He told me he had been watching them, more than one of them, for years, from a distance, always from a distance. And he told me they were changing.
I'm Alex, and the reason I am making this video instead of just sitting on those 11 seconds of footage is that he also told me what he was going to do next.
He told me he was going to stop watching from far away. He was going to go and find the place where they shelter, up in the mountains. He said he would be careful, and then he stopped writing back. Now, before we go any further, I want you to think about scale for a second, because this is the thing people never sit with long enough. North America has somewhere around 2 million square miles of forest. There are mountain valleys on this continent that no human being walks into in a given year. Not a hunter, not a hiker, not a logger, nobody. We have mapped the surface of Mars in higher resolution than we have walked some of the backcountry in our own hemisphere. So the question was never really whether something large could stay hidden out there. The honest question is what happens to the rare person who decides to stop watching it from a safe distance and walk toward it instead. So let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the first email he ever sent me, and the long, strange road that led to those 11 seconds of footage, and to the silence that came after. Let me tell you what I can about him, which is not very much, because that is the deal we made, and I intend to keep it. He is a private person with a real reason to stay private. He has a kind of life and the kind of work where being known as the Bigfoot guy would cost him something he is not willing to pay. He has trail cameras the way some people have a workshop or a fishing boat. It is a serious hobby, a years-long one, not a stunt. He knows his equipment, he knows his ground, and he is patient in a way that almost nobody is anymore. When he first reached out, it was not with a wild claim. It was with a careful, almost shy question about whether I thought a certain kind of footage was worth anything at all. And here's the part I have to say plainly once, so we can move past it and look at what actually matters. I cannot verify any of this for you. I cannot prove the clip is real. I cannot confirm his name, and I would not tell you if I could. He brightened the footage himself before he sent it because the original was nearly black, and that means what you are seeing has been processed. He would not tell me where this happened, not the state, not the region, not the mountain range. That was the condition for sharing it at all, and I agreed to it. So take all of this with a healthy pinch of salt. I am not here to tell you what to believe. I am here to show you what he showed me, and to tell you what he told me, and to be honest about the parts I cannot stand behind. That is the housekeeping. Now let us actually look at the thing. Because the more I sat with this clip, the more I realized the part that unsettles me is not really the creature at all. It is him. It is the arc of a careful man, and what that kind of patience does to a person over years, and where it finally led him. To understand the footage, you have to understand the person who spent a decade earning it. So let me tell you the rest of what I know in the order I came to know it. Run the clip again in your head, because the details are where this either falls apart or gets under your skin.
It enters from the left, and the first thing that strikes you is that it is not in a hurry. Wild animals caught by a flash at night tend to do one of two things. They bolt or they freeze and stare into the light. This does neither. It just walks. The gait is what people always come back to with footage like this, and I understand why.
There is a smoothness to it, a roll through the hip and the knee, the arms swinging in a long, loose counter rhythm to the legs. The proportions are wrong for a person in the way that matters. The arms are long, the legs are long, the shoulders are absurdly wide, and the head sits low and forward on them, with very little neck to speak of. Then comes the moment with the tree. As it crosses, it comes right up against the trunk in the foreground, and you can see a hand on it, the fingers visible against the bark. And the hand is the thing that bothers me most, in the best way. The fingers are long. They look, for lack of a better word, like a hand. Not a paw, not a hoof, a hand. The feet read the same way, broad and long-toed where you can make them out. And then it moves on, off to the right, out of the frame. The whole pass is unhurried and deliberate. It does not bolt, it does not freeze and stare into the flash. It crosses, it pauses at the tree, it keeps going. It does not behave like something that wandered into frame by accident. It behaves like something that knows exactly where it is and is simply passing through. Now let me give the other side its full due, because this channel does not exist to sell you on the easy answer. Everything I just described is also exactly what a tall, athletic person in a high-end costume would look like on a cheap night camera. The slow walk is what you do when you do not want to trip in the dark. The long arms can be extensions built into a suit. The brightening that lets you see the hands is also the single best way to hide the seams where a mask meets a neck, because lifting the shadows washes out exactly the detail that would give a costume away. A flashlit night clip, 11 seconds long, with no scale reference and no continuous wide shot, is in the year 2026 one of the easiest things in the entire world to fake. I am not saying it is fake, I am saying that if someone set out to fake it, this is precisely what the result would look like. So where do I personally land on the clip itself? Somewhere uncomfortable and honest. I do not think this is the smoking gun. One short, processed, locationless clip never could be, no matter how good it looks. But I also cannot make the easy frames go away, the hand on the tree, the wrongness of those proportions. It sits in the place where the best of this evidence always sits, compelling enough that you cannot dismiss it, thin enough that you cannot stand on it. You're going to have to look at it and decide for yourself, and I would genuinely like to hear where you come down. The title of this video says he found footage again, and I owe you an explanation of that word because it is doing a lot of work. This clip did not arrive in a vacuum. It is the clearest thing he ever captured, but it is the latest in a long line of moments, most of which were nothing. He has been running cameras on the same ground for years, and for most of that time, what he got back was the ordinary parade of the woods. Deer. A bear now and then, branches moving in the wind and tripping the sensor at 3 in the morning. The boredom of the trail camera hobby is the part nobody films. But every so often, he told me, he got something at the edges, a shape too big at the corner of the frame, a pale smear that the camera caught for a single frame and then lost, a crossing always at the same handful of spots, always at the same slice of the night, in that uncertain hour after the light is fully gone, but before the deep middle of the dark. It took him a long time, by his own account, to stop explaining these away. He is not a man who wanted to believe. He is a man who got tired of pretending he did not see a pattern. He described the slow process of it to me once, and it is the most convincing thing in all of our correspondence, precisely because it is so undramatic. First, you assume it is a bear that stood up. Then it happens again somewhere a bear would not stand. Then you notice the timing is too regular, the same window night after night. Then you notice the crossing points are too consistent, the same few gaps in the tree line, used the way a person uses a doorway. He said the moment that broke him was not a clear photo at all. It was a stretch of weeks where he could predict roughly where and when the next blurred shape would appear. And he was right often enough that he could no longer call it coincidence. You do not get to predict a hallucination. You do not get to predict a hoax you are not running. And the pattern was the thing that changed everything for him, because once he started really paying attention, he became convinced he was not looking at one animal that happened to wander through. He was looking at more than one, different sizes, different builds, one noticeably larger and heavier than the rest, one that moved like something younger, a difference in the way the weight came down through the stride. The same routes used over and over, season after season, in a way that a transient animal does not do. He started to feel like he had stumbled onto not a sighting, but a place that something used, the way deer use a trail or geese use a flyway. And that is a very different and much heavier thing to carry. A single sighting you can file away as a strange night. A place that something returns to, generation after generation, asks you to believe in a population, in a breeding group, in a thing that has been doing this, undisturbed, for a very long time, a few ridges over from where the rest of us live our lives.
Here is what separates him from almost every account I get. He did not want to be believed. He spent years trying to talk himself out of it. The careful witness, the one with everything to lose and nothing to gain, is the one the whole field has always taken most seriously.
He is not the first person to describe a place in the woods that something uses. That is the part of this that reaches back much further than any trail camera. Across this continent, long before any of us were here with our cameras and our forums, the people who lived closest to these forests had names for the tall ones, who walked upright in the deep timber. Nation after nation, language after language, with no contact between many of them, you find the same figure, something man-shaped and hair-covered, taller and broader than a person, that keeps to the edges, that watches more than it is seen, that is treated less like a monster to be hunted and more like a neighbor to be respected and left alone. Some traditions describe it as a keeper of the wild places. Some describe it as dangerous if disrespected. Almost all of them describe the same physical thing, and almost all of them describe the same behavior. It avoids us, it watches, it moves through. What gets me about the old accounts is not the existence of a legend. Every culture has its monsters, and a skeptic is right to point out that a scary story in the woods is about the most universal thing a human being produces. What gets me is the specificity and the overlap between groups that had no way of comparing notes. The same low-set head with almost no neck, the same disproportionately long arms, the same description of a thing that stands and watches from a tree line rather than charging or fleeing. The same insistence again and again that you do not bother it, and it does not bother you. That is a very particular profile to arrive at independently over and over across thousands of miles. And then you layer on a couple of centuries of settler accounts, trappers and loggers and homesteaders, people with no shared folklore and often no shared language, reporting the very same creature. The wide shoulders, the low-set head, the long arms, the smell sometimes, that sour, musky reek that witnesses describe so consistently it has become a cliché of the field. The uncanny sense of being watched from a tree line. The footprints far too large and too human in shape to belong to a bear, with a flexibility in the middle of the foot that a bear track simply does not have. The reports pile up across the 19th and 20th centuries from people who, by and large, had nothing to gain and a fair amount of standing to lose by telling them. Now, a skeptic will tell you fairly that humans are pattern-making animals who see faces in clouds and giants in the dark, and that a shared story does not make a shared creature. They will tell you that stories travel, that the modern image of Bigfoot has been so thoroughly absorbed into the culture that no witness today comes to an encounter with a blank mind, and that expectation shapes memory more powerfully than any of us like to admit. That is all true, and I am not going to pretend it is not. Contamination is real. Once a story is famous enough, it starts manufacturing its own witnesses. But here's the thing I keep turning over. The behavior in those old accounts is the same behavior in his clip. The watching, the deliberate route, the hand on the tree, the passing through of something that is aware of you and simply chooses not to engage. When the description from a frightened homesteader 200 years ago matches the 11 seconds on a memory card in 2026, that consistency is its own kind of evidence. It does not prove the creature. A consistent story can be a consistent error. But it is a strange thing to explain away, and I notice that the people most eager to explain it away have usually spent the least time actually sitting with how much of it there is. And this is where his account stops being a collection of sightings and turns into something that genuinely unsettles me. Because the most important thing he told me was not that they were there. It was that they were changing. Over the years he watched, he said they got less careful. That was the word he used. Less careful. In the early footage, the crossings were deep in the night, fast, always at maximum distance from the camera, always at the tree line. As time went on, he said, the passes came earlier, closer to the edge of daylight. They came nearer to the camera rather than skirting it. They reacted less to the equipment, as if the gear had stopped registering as a threat, or as if something else had pushed their caution down the list of their concerns. The clip you're looking at, the slow walk, the unbothered pass, the hand on the tree, is, by his account, the clearest example of that change. This is not an animal sneaking through. This is an animal that has stopped bothering to sneak. He had his theories about why, and he offered them as theories, not facts, which is one of the reasons I trusted him. Maybe their range was being squeezed, he said, and they were being forced to use ground closer to people than they would choose to. Maybe a hard season had moved them. Maybe a food source had shifted. Or maybe, and this is the one he kept circling back to, something was changing that he could not name, and the boldness was a symptom of it rather than the thing itself. He told me about other things too, things I have gone back and forth on whether to even include, because they are the parts that sound the most like folklore and the parts that are easiest to fake. He said he had found arrangements in the timber, branches stacked and leaned in ways the wind does not do, saplings twisted over and broken at a height that would take real strength and real reach, lines of debris that seemed to mark something, a boundary or a route, that he learned to read over time. I want to be clear that this is his interpretation. A broken tree is just a broken tree until a human mind decides it is a sign, and the woods are full of accidents that look like intention if you want them to. But he was adamant that the arrangements clustered near the crossings and that he started to find them in places he had not before, as if whatever made them was extending its territory, marking ground it had not bothered to mark in the years prior. More activity, more boldness, more signs, all of it pointing the same direction. And here is why I cannot dismiss it as one man's imagination running ahead of him. Because this past spring, far away from wherever he is, something happened in Ohio that has the entire community arguing. In early March of 2026, in the wooded country of Portage County, southeast of Cleveland, reports started coming in. Not one, a cluster. The Bigfoot Society, a podcast and research community with hundreds of thousands of members, logged around 8 separate sightings between March 6th and March 10th in towns like Mantua, Garrettsville, Streetsboro, and Newton Township. Witnesses described tall, hair-covered, bipedal figures, somewhere between 6 and 10 feet, dark brown to black, moving through the woods, crossing rural roads, setting dogs into fits of fear. One report on a hiking trail described a roughly 10-foot figure with an odd, stilt-like walk and a heavy musk. The host of that community, a researcher named Jeremiah Byron, said something that stuck with me. He said it is normal to have Bigfoot sightings scattered all over the country, but it is not normal to have this many in one small area in a handful of days, and that nothing like it had been documented in that region since the late 1970s. And the researchers tracking it noticed the same thing my correspondent had noticed on the other side of the country and on a smaller scale. The Ohio sightings seemed to follow a path, east-southeast, valley to valley, as if something were on the move. The word that got used, half seriously, was migration. A herd on the move after a hard winter. More than one animal, the heights and colors too varied to be a single individual, traveling a corridor through the rural interior. Look at the specifics of what the Ohio witnesses described, because they rhyme with his account in ways that are hard to ignore. The encounters happen along a wooded greenway, a corridor of timber connecting a string of small towns through rural country, exactly the kind of edge habitat where forest meets the thin margins of human settlement. The figures were described crossing roads, moving through trees at the edges of properties, close enough that people walking dogs at 4 a.m. got a good, frightening look. That is bold behavior. That's not a creature keeping to the deep backcountry where nobody goes. That is a creature using the seams, the in-between places, the same shift toward human edges that he had been documenting for years, before any of this hit the news. One witness even described that odd, stilt-like gait and the heavy musk, and I think about the way the thing in his clip moves, that long, rolling, deliberate stride, and I cannot help connecting them even as I tell myself not to. Now I'm going to be straight with you, because the easy thing would be to leave the Ohio story sitting there glowing and let you draw the scary conclusion for me. The honest version has caveats. Not one of those 8 Ohio sightings produced a photograph, a track cast that survived scrutiny, or a body. The local sheriff's office checked its calls and found trespassing complaints and false alarms, but nothing logged as a creature. And the sheriff himself treated the whole thing as a joke online, posting gag images of the creature in handcuffs, even as he admitted his office took real, frightened calls from residents who were not laughing at all. And the skeptics have a genuinely strong point that I will not wave away. The folklorist Benjamin Radford put it about as sharply as it can be put. In an age when every single person is carrying a high-resolution camera in their pocket, at some point a creature's luck has to run out. The absence of one clean image after all this time and all these phones is itself a piece of evidence, and an uncomfortable one. A wave of sightings that produces a wave of stories, and not a single clear photograph is exactly what you would expect if the cause were excitement and suggestion rather than a population of animals. So hold both of those things in your head at once, because that is the only honest way to carry this. It is possible that nothing is changing at all, and that what looks like a wave is just more cameras, more phones, more people primed by the stories to interpret a shadow as a Sasquatch. And it is also possible that two people who have never met, one running quiet cameras in the mountains for years, and one community of witnesses in an Ohio spring, noticed the same real thing at the same time. Boulder movement, closer passes, animals on the move, something shifting. Where do I personally come down on the changing behavior idea? It is the most fascinating thing he ever told me and the least provable, and I think you have to be honest that those two facts are related. A claim about a slow change in behavior observed by one man over years in a place he will not name is almost impossible to test. I cannot stand behind it as fact, but I cannot make the Ohio flap line up with his account as neatly as it does and feel nothing. I feel something. I just refuse to call that feeling proof. Which brings me to the last real conversation we had, and the reason this video has the ending it has. For years, the entire foundation of how he operated was distance. He watched from far away. He let the cameras do the watching for him. He was proud of that, in a quiet way. He used to say that the reason he had seen as much as he had was precisely that he had never pushed, never pressured them, never tried to close the gap. He believed they tolerated his cameras because the cameras did not chase. He thought of himself, I think, as a respectful guest on ground that was not his. And then, in the last stretch of our correspondence, that changed. The boldness he had been documenting started to work on him in reverse. If they were coming closer, he reasoned, then maybe the thing he had always told himself was impossible was actually within reach. He had a belief built up over years of watching the routes about where they went when they were not crossing his cameras. Up higher into the mountains to some place he thought of as where they sheltered, and he decided he was going to find it. He was not reckless about it, or at least he did not present it that way to me. He framed it as observation, not confrontation. He talked about going carefully, about keeping his distance even as he closed in, about wanting only to confirm the place existed and to understand it, not to disturb whatever used it. He used the word careful more than once. I remember that clearly because I've gone back and reread those messages more times than I would like to admit, and the word careful is in them. And it has started to feel less like reassurance and more like the thing people say right before the thing they cannot take back. Because here is what you already know, sitting where you are sitting. You know how this part of the story is shaped. A man spends years building a careful, respectful distance from something large and powerful and barely understood. And then, at the very moment that thing seems to be growing bolder, he decides to give up the one thing that kept him safe, the distance, and walk toward it. He told me he would be careful. He told me he would write when he got back. I tried, in my own quiet way, to talk him down from it. Not hard, because it was not my place, and because part of me, the part that runs a channel like this, wanted to know what he would find as badly as he did. But I told him the obvious thing, that the entire reason he had gotten as far as he had was the distance. That whatever tolerance these animals showed his cameras was a tolerance for being watched, not for being followed. That a creature growing bolder is not the same as a creature growing safer, and that the two might in fact be opposites. He heard me. He did not disagree exactly. He just said that he had spent his whole life being careful, and that he was getting older, and that he did not want to die having watched something extraordinary from a safe distance for years without ever once trying to truly see it. I did not have an answer for that. I am not sure there is one. He did not write when he got back. It has been 3 weeks. The last substantial message was the one laying out the plan, the where and the why and the careful. After that, the thread that had been alive for so long simply went quiet. I have sent follow-ups, a few of them. I have tried to keep them light, the way you do when you're telling yourself there's nothing wrong, just checking in, hope the trip went well, curious what you found, nothing comes back. The messages sit there, unanswered, and every day that passes makes the silence a little louder. And I have to be honest with you about the limits of what I know, because the temptation here, the thing that would make for a better story and a worse truth, is to tell you something happened to him. I do not know that. I want to say that clearly. He may be completely fine. He may be off-grid for reasons that have nothing to do with any of this. He may have thought better of the whole thing, decided he had said too much to a stranger on the internet, and pulled back to protect himself. People go quiet for 100 ordinary reasons. I'm not going to stand here and tell you a man is in trouble because he stopped answering his email. That would be a lie dressed up as concern. But I am also not going to pretend the shape of it does not bother me, because strip away the speculation and look only at what I can actually account for. A careful man. Years of watching from a safe distance. A documented sense that the thing he watched was growing bolder. A stated decision to abandon his distance and go find where it lives. And then silence, starting from the moment he went to do it. I cannot tell you what happened in that gap. I can only tell you that the gap is there, and that I check for his name in my inbox every single morning. There's a specific kind of unease that comes from an unanswered message, and anyone who has waited on one knows it. At first you barely notice. Then you start telling yourself the ordinary stories, the bad signal, the busy life, the second thoughts. And then, somewhere in the 3rd week, the ordinary stories stop being quite enough to cover the silence, and you find yourself doing the thing I have been doing, which is rereading old messages looking for a clue you missed the first time. I have not found one. The last message is calm, it is careful. It is a man telling a friend he is about to go do a thing he has wanted to do for years, and that he will be in touch when it is done. There is nothing ominous in it at all, and that is somehow the most ominous part. He did not sound like a man walking into something. He sounded like a man certain he was coming back. If you are watching this and you run cameras in high country and any of it sounds familiar, the roots, the boldness, the structures, the feeling of a place that something uses, I want to hear from you in the comments, not for the views, because there is a chance, however small, that someone out there recognizes this, and I would rather know than wonder. And now I have to do the thing this channel always does, the thing that I think is the only reason any of this is worth your time. I have to make the strongest possible case against everything I just told you, so here it is with no hedging. There is a version of this where none of it is real. In that version, a man invented a compelling correspondent, brightened a clip of a friend in a good suit, fed me exactly the kind of careful, reluctant, credible-sounding details that someone who understands this community knows will land, and then ended the whole thing on a disappearance. Because a disappearance is the single most powerful ending a story like this can have. Think about how clean it is. The anonymity means nothing can be checked. The refusal to name a location means nothing can be visited. The processed footage means nothing can be analyzed. The silence at the end means the story never has to resolve, never has to deliver the body or the proof that would expose it. If you set out to build an unfalsifiable Bigfoot story, you would build exactly this one. And there is no body, there is no specimen, there is no clean photograph, there is no GPS pin, no verifiable witness, no second source. There's a clip I cannot stand behind and a silence I cannot explain. I have to sit in that. So do you. That is the cost of being honest about this stuff instead of just selling it. and I want to extend the skeptic the courtesy of his strongest argument, not his weakest. The strongest case against all of this is not that any one detail is wrong, it is that the whole structure of the story is built perfectly to resist being checked. Real evidence invites scrutiny. It comes with a place you can go, a name you can call, a file you can hand to someone who knows more than you do. This comes with none of that, and every missing piece is explained by a reason that also happens to make verification impossible. Why no location? To protect him? Why no name? To protect him. Why is the footage processed? Because the original was too dark. Why did it end? Because he disappeared. Each answer is individually reasonable. Stacked together, they form a story that can never be falsified and never be confirmed, which is exactly the property a fabrication would need to survive contact with someone like me, whose entire job on this channel is to try to knock these things down. A skeptic would say that is not a coincidence. A skeptic would say that is the design. And yet, here's the thing the skeptical case cannot quite kill. The people the field has always taken most seriously are not the showmen. They are the quiet ones, the ones with something to lose, the ones who do not want the attention, who try to talk themselves out of it, who share what they have reluctantly and then go quiet rather than ride it for everything it is worth. That is the entire profile of the man who sent me these 11 seconds. So which is he? The careful, credible witness whose very caution makes him believable? Or someone who understood better than any showman that the most convincing version of this story is the one told by a man who does not seem to want to tell it at all? I genuinely do not know. And I think anyone who tells you they are certain in either direction is selling you something. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with 11 seconds of footage that is compelling and unprovable. It leaves us with a claim about changing behavior that is fascinating and untestable, and an Ohio spring that lines up with that claim in a way that is either meaningful or a trick of timing. And it leaves us with a man who went quiet at the worst possible moment to go quiet. Here is where I personally land, and I want to be clear that this is a position, not a verdict, and I would honestly like to be argued out of it. I do not think that clip is proof of anything. I do not think it could be. But I do not think the man who sent it to me was lying either. I think he saw something real over a long time, and I think it got bolder, and I think it pulled him in, the way the unknown always pulls in the people who get too close to it. Whether what pulled him in was a creature or his own conviction, I cannot say. I'm not sure those are even as different as we like to pretend. And maybe that is the real shape of every story like this one, underneath the footage and the legends and the flap in Ohio. Maybe what we are really watching is what happens to a certain kind of person when they spend long enough at the edge of the known. He started out wanting to document something. He ended up needing to reach it. The distance that kept him safe became the thing he could no longer tolerate. I do not think that is a Bigfoot phenomenon. I think that is a human one, and I think it is older than any legend. The pull toward the thing in the dark is the same pull that has always sent people over the next ridge and out past the edge of the map. And most of them came back, and some of them did not, and the ones who did not left exactly this kind of silence behind them. I keep the thread open. I have not archived it, have not let it drop down the inbox to where I would stop seeing it. It sits there at the top, and I look at it, and every time I watch those 11 seconds, the slow walk, the long arm reaching out, the hand against the tree, I find myself stuck on the same thought. The last thing he ever told me was that he was going to go and find where it lives, and I do not know if he found it. I only know that he has not come back to tell me, and that somewhere out there on a memory card or in a place he would not name, the rest of this story is still sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to walk far enough in to find it. there's a tape in the bottom drawer of my brother's desk. It has been there for 8 years. He has never let anyone watch it all the way through. Not the sheriff, not our mother before she passed, not me until 3 months ago. It is still recording when you press play. That is the thing people do not understand. The camera never stopped. It caught everything that happened on the far side of that creek. And the reason my brother Daniel has not spoken about that summer in 8 years is sitting on that tape, frame by frame, in the leaves where Tommy dropped it. I need to tell you what is on it. I need to tell you about the thing my brother fed for 11 years at the edge of our property. The thing he named. The thing with the split left ear that stood over 7 feet tall at the tree line and watched our house through the rain. And I need to tell you about my cousin Tommy, who came to Oregon that summer to film it up close. He wanted proof. He wanted the whole world to see what my brother had been protecting in secret for a decade. He crossed the creek on a Tuesday morning with the camera running. Daniel turned away for 30 seconds. When he looked back, there was only the camera in the leaves. Last week, something came in the mail that means I cannot stay quiet anymore. So I am going to tell you all of it. And by the end, you will understand why crossing that water was the last thing my cousin ever did. I should tell you who I am because the kind of person telling a story like this matters. I am the younger brother. Daniel is 6 years older than me, and I left our family land in Oregon when I was 19 and did not come back for any real length of time until I was almost 40. I worked freight logistics in 3 different states. I am not a believer in anything. I have never seen a ghost, never had a feeling about a place, never once in my life thought the woods were anything but woods. When people in my office would talk about Bigfoot the way people talk about it, as a joke, as a costume, as a thing on a beef jerky commercial, I laughed along with them. I want you to hold on to that because everything I'm about to tell you, I did not believe when my brother was living it. I thought he was a lonely man inventing a companion. I was wrong in a way I will spend the rest of my life trying to make peace with. Our property sits at the eastern edge of the national forest, up past the last paved road in a part of Oregon where the cell signal dies a full mile before you reach the gate. Our father bought the land in the 70s and ran cattle on the lower pasture until his knees gave out. There is the house which our grandfather built and our father expanded badly. There's the back 40, which is not 40 acres of anything anymore, just a long slope of mixed pine and fir that climbs up toward the ridge. There is the creek, which cuts across the property line maybe 300 yards behind the house and marks the boundary between our land and federal land. And there is the old logging road, grown over now, that the timber crews used in the 50s and that nobody has driven in my lifetime. When our father died, Daniel stayed. I did not. That is the simplest way to say it. Daniel was the one who stayed on the land and ran it alone, and I was the one who sent a card at Christmas and called on birthdays and told myself that someone living that far out in the trees by himself was bound to get strange. Every time we talked, he had a little more of the woods in him and a little less of the rest of the world. He stopped going into town except for supplies. He let the truck go to rust. He kept a notebook, he told me once, of things he was tracking on the property, and I assumed he meant deer or weather or the slow business of a man with too much quiet in his life. I thought he was lonely. I thought he was inventing a friend. I had a whole story in my head about my brother and his imaginary woods. And I held on to that story for years because it was easier than the truth. It is worth admitting how that story protected me, not him. As long as Daniel was just a lonely man talking to the trees, I did not have to drive out there. I did not have to sit with him in that quiet. I could send the card and make the birthday call and keep my city life with its offices and its airports. And I could tell myself I was the normal one and he was the one who had drifted. When the truth, which I see now, is that he had simply stayed where our father left him and I had run. And the thing he found in those woods, he found because he was the one who stayed long enough and quiet enough to be found. The truth started the way Daniel told it to me, with food that went missing in a way that did not make sense. It was the autumn after our father's funeral. Daniel had taken to leaving the kitchen scraps out past the woodshed instead of carrying them to the compost, partly out of laziness and partly out of grief, the way a grieving man stopped doing the small, correct things. Raccoons, he figured. Then he noticed that whatever was taking the scraps was not scattering them the way an animal scatters. It was taking the food and leaving the dish, not knocking it over, not dragging it off, lifting it, emptying it, setting it back down. He started watching. He moved the dish a little farther from the house each week, out toward the tree line, and each morning it was empty and upright. Then one morning there was a stone on top of the dish, a round river stone, the kind you would have to walk down to the creek to find, sitting in the center of the empty dish like a paperweight. Daniel stood there for a long time looking at that stone. He told me he knew, standing there, that he was not dealing with a raccoon. He just did not yet have a word for what he was dealing with. The first time he saw it fully was a night in November he could give me the exact date for, years later, without pausing. There had been an early snow, just a dusting, enough to hold a print. He had heard the dish move, and he went out onto the back step with a flashlight, and he swept the beam up toward the tree line, and it was standing there. He described it to me the way you describe something you have looked at 10,000 times in your memory, over 7 feet tall. Not an ape, he was firm about that. Nothing like the ape in the costume on the jerky commercial. The face was wide and flat and almost human. A heavy ridge of bone over the eyes, a broad nose, no muzzle, no snout. The hair was a dark rust brown across the shoulders, shading down to near black, matted and long. And the eyes, when the flashlight caught them, did not flare green or yellow the way an animal's eyes flare. They just looked back. He said it was the looking back that he could not get past. An animal looks at the light. This looked at him. Neither of them moved. Daniel said it must have been a full minute. The two of them on either side of that snow before the thing turned and went up the slope without hurrying, without crashing through brush, just folding itself back into the dark between the trees the way smoke goes back into a chimney. And then it was gone. And there was the empty dish, and the one set of prints in the snow longer than his own boot by half again. That was the beginning. What came after was 11 years. I want to be careful here, because the easy thing to do is to tell you my brother befriended a monster, and that is not what happened. And the difference is the whole reason I'm telling you any of this. What happened over the months after that first night was a slow, deliberate, two-way thing. And it was the two-way part that broke my disbelief years later when Daniel finally walked me through it. Because an animal does not negotiate. An animal does not test you and adjust. This did. The food kept disappearing, and Daniel kept moving the line of it. And one evening, he did the thing he had been afraid to do. He stayed outside, he set the dish down, and he sat on the woodpile in plain view, and he waited in the failing light to see if it would come while he was there. For 3 nights, nothing came at all, and he understood that he had broken something, that being watched while it ate was not part of the arrangement. So he changed. He set the food, and he went back inside, and he watched from the window, and on the 4th night, it came down to the line while he was visible behind the glass, and it ate, and it looked at the window once, and that was the first time both of them agreed on the terms. It learned its patterns, and he learned its limits, and the limit, the one that matters, the one I need you to remember for later, was this. It would tolerate being near him as long as he was still. It would tolerate being watched as long as he kept his distance. The moment he moved toward it, The moment he closed the gap, it was gone, and it would stay gone for days. Patience, it accepted. Pursuit, it would not. Daniel learned that rule in the first year the way you learn a hot stove, by getting burned, by trying once to walk out toward it with the dish in his hands and watching it vanish, and then not seeing it again until the next moon. He told me the moment he knew it was a mind and not just a clever animal, it was the second winter. He had taken to whistling a particular 3-note pattern when he set the food out, the way you might ring a bell, nothing trained, just a habit. And one night from up the slope, out of the dark, the 3 notes came back, same pattern, slightly wrong, like a man humming a song he has only half learned, but unmistakably the same shape. It had been listening. It had kept the pattern. It gave it back to him. After that, he stopped thinking of it as an it, though I will keep calling it that for you because the name he gave it is the one thing of his I am not ready to say out loud. The proofs stacked up over the years, and they were never the proof a scientist would want, never a clean photograph or a cast print, but they were the kind of proof that works on a man living alone with the thing. It moved a fallen branch off the path he used to walk to the creek, dragged it clear, and laid it parallel to the trail. It left objects on the woodpile, a curl of bark worked into a spiral, a bird's skull cleaned white, once a length of old barbed wire wound into a tight coil, gifts that meant nothing and meant everything. During a bad storm one March, he watched it stand at the tree line for the better part of an hour, just standing, facing the house, as if it were keeping watch. And when the storm passed, it was gone. And there was the night it warned him. He had been heading up the old logging road in the dark to check a sound, and it came down the slope fast and stopped in the road ahead of him, blocking him, and would not let him pass. And he backed off because what else do you do? And in the morning he found that a section of the road above had washed out in the rain into a drop he would have walked straight off in the dark. I asked him the way the skeptic in me had to ask, whether maybe he just stopped because a 7-foot thing was in the road and the washout was a coincidence. He looked at me for a while and said, "You can call it a coincidence if it lets you sleep." It did not let me sleep, so I did not call it that. The split ear, the detail I led with, the thing he used to tell it apart from any imagining, came from somewhere in those middle years. The left ear was torn through, an old wound healed wrong, a notch out of the top of it. Daniel never knew how it happened, a fight, a trap, another one of its kind. But it meant that on the rare nights he saw the face clearly, he was always certain it was the same individual. The same mind, year after year, not a rotating cast of animals, one person, returning. I keep using that word, person. I did not use it for years. I am using it now on purpose. Let me give you the 11 years the way I came to understand them, not as one long mood, but as a string of specific nights, because that is how Daniel kept them, and because the specifics are what finally undid me. There was the first winter it came all the way to the porch. Daniel woke to a sound on the boards and looked out, and it was crouched at the bottom of the steps, lower than he had ever seen it hold itself, making itself small, and it had brought nothing and taken nothing. It had just come close in the cold and then left before dawn. He never knew what that night was about. Loneliness, maybe. He understood loneliness. There was the year Daniel hurt his back hauling a downed fur and could not get up the slope to leave food for the better part of a week. He left it by the woodshed when he could manage, close to the house, and the thing changed its range to match. It held at the edge of the lower clearing where it could see the door, closer to the house than it had ever willingly come in daylight. And it stayed there, off and on, for the days Daniel was laid up, as if it had understood that something was wrong and had decided to wait it out where it could keep an eye on him. There was the offering he did not know how to read. A spring morning on the woodpile, a deer, freshly killed, laid out whole. Not eaten, not buried, left for him. Daniel stood looking at it for a long time, the way he had stood looking at the river stone years before, trying to understand what he was being told. Was it a gift, the way you bring food to someone you care about? Was it a sharing of a kill? He never knew. He buried the deer and he left out extra food that night, and the arrangement went on. There was a summer of the other ones. For most of those 11 years, Daniel was sure he was dealing with a single individual, the one with the torn ear, the one mind that returned. But one August, he started finding 2 sets of prints at the line, the familiar long one and a second set smaller and narrower beside it. And twice in that month, he caught, at the very edge of the flashlight, a second shape up the slope that held back and would not come down while the first one ate. He never saw the second one clearly. He came to believe over that summer that the torn ear one had brought someone, shown someone the arrangement, the food and the man and the house, the way you might bring a person you trust to meet someone else you trust. The second shape stopped appearing by September. Daniel never knew if it was a mate, a young one grown, a stranger passing through. But it changed something in how he understood the whole thing. He was not a hobby to it. He was a place on its map, a thing worth showing to its own. There was the night of the dogs. A pack of someone's hunting hounds had gotten loose down in the valley and worked their way up onto the property in the dark, baying, running a line straight toward the creek. And Daniel heard them, and heard underneath them a sound he had never heard before and hoped never to hear again, a low rolling call that came down off the ridge and seemed to move the air in his chest. The dogs stopped, all of them at once, mid-bay, and then he heard them going back down the valley faster than they had come up. And in the morning there were no hounds and no prints of hounds anywhere near the creek, only the long, familiar tracks laid down in a line between the dog's turning point and the tree line, as if something had simply stood between the pack and the property and let them understand that this was not a place they would be coming into. There was the gift he kept, most of what was left on the woodpile over the years. Daniel let go back to the woods, the bark spirals, the bones, the coils of wire, because he felt that keeping them was a kind of taking. But one autumn, there was a thing he could not make himself give back. A flat stone worked, he was sure of it, chipped along one edge into something almost like a blade, almost like a tool. The kind of thing that if you found it in a museum case, you would read a little card about early man and move on. He kept it in a drawer in the kitchen, and he never told anyone, and it is, I think, the only physical object from 11 years that still exists. And I have held it, and I do not have words for what it is like to hold a thing made by hands that were not human hands and were not the hands of any human who ever lived. There was the boundary he tested once, years in, and regretted. A bad night, a low night, the kind of night a man alone in the trees has. And he had wanted badly just once to touch it, to close the last 20 feet and put his hand on the shoulder of the only thing in the world that came back to him. He stood up off the woodpile and he took one step toward the tree line, and it was gone before his second step landed, and it did not come back for a month, the longest month of that whole decade. And Daniel said he sat out every one of those nights with the food untouched and learned in his body, all over again, the rule he already knew. It tolerates patience. It will not be pursued. He never broke it again. He spent the rest of those years on the right side of that line, and he kept the thing's trust because of it. And there was the night the whole family almost saw it, which is the night the secret really became a secret. Our mother, before she got too frail to make the drive, had come up to stay a few days, and she had heard Daniel go out and had followed him to the back step out of a mother's worry, and she had been standing right beside him when the 3 notes came down the slope. She did not see it. The dark was kind. But she heard it answer his whistle, and she heard the weight of it move in the brush, the particular sound of something very large being very careful. And she gripped Daniel's arm hard enough to leave marks and asked him what in God's name was out there. And Daniel made a choice in that moment that he made over and over for 11 years. He told her it was an elk. He walked her back inside with his hand steady on her shoulder, and he sat up with her until she stopped shaking. And the next morning, he told me about it on the phone, years before I believed a word. And I remember thinking, my brother is telling our mother there are elk that whistle. My brother has gone all the way around the bend. He had decided the thing was his to protect, and protecting it meant lying to the people he loved, and he carried that for over a decade. I think about that now, that he lied to our own mother on her last visit to the land rather than risk the thing in the trees. And I understand it as the truest measure of what it had come to mean to him. And there was the winter of the long cold, the year the power went out for 9 days in an ice storm, and Daniel lived by the wood stove and could not get the truck down the frozen road. He was rationing his own food by the end of it, and he had stopped putting anything out at the line because he had nothing to spare, and he felt the guilt of that, the breaking of a 9-year habit, like a betrayal. On the 6th night of the cold, he heard the boards and looked out, and there on the back step, where it had only come once before, was a rabbit, freshly killed, and beside it a scatter of the hard winter berries that grow up on the ridge where Daniel never went. It had noticed he had stopped. It had decided he was the one who needed feeding now. He cooked the rabbit. He has never been able to tell that part of the story without stopping in the middle of it. A decade of quiet. That is a thing to understand before Tommy. By the time my cousin came up that summer, Daniel and the creature had 11 years of careful, patient, mutual peace between them. 11 years of food at the line and gifts on the woodpile, and 3 notes traded in the dark. 11 years of a relationship built entirely on one rule, kept on both sides, never broken. It was the most stable thing in my brother's life, and it took 1 week to destroy. Tommy was our cousin on our mother's side, 24 that summer, and I knew him better than Daniel did because Tommy had grown up nearer to me. He was not a bad kid. I want to be fair to him because he is gone and cannot be anything now but what I say about him. He was a kid who had grown up entirely inside a phone, who measured the worth of a thing by how many people would look at it, and who had convinced himself that he was one good video away from never having to work a normal job again. He had a channel. It had a few thousand followers. He did stunts, urban exploring, abandoned buildings, the kind of content where a young man does something slightly dangerous and films his own face reacting to it. He came up to Oregon that summer because his mother asked Daniel to take him for a while, get him out of the city, give him some air and some work. And within 3 days, Tommy had found the notebook. Daniel kept it in the kitchen, the record of 11 years, the dates and the gifts and the patterns. He had never thought to hide it because no one ever came up there. Tommy found it the way a bored young man finds everything by going through the house, and he read it, and he understood immediately what it was, and the look on his face when he came out onto the porch holding it was, Daniel told me later, the look of a man who has found money in the walls. What happened next happened fast over about a week, and it happened as a series of escalations, each one a little further across the line. First, Tommy just wanted to know everything, and Daniel, who had carried the secret alone for 11 years, and who was, underneath the privacy, achingly lonely with it, made the mistake of telling him. Not all of it, but enough. The food line, the whistle, the rule. Daniel told Tommy the rule explicitly, told him the only reason any of it had lasted was that no one had ever pushed toward the creature, that it would tolerate patience and would not tolerate pursuit. That if Tommy did anything other than watch from a distance, the whole thing would end. Daniel said he watched Tommy nod along to every word of that warning and understood too late that the kid was not hearing a rule. He was hearing a challenge. Then Tommy set up cameras, trail cameras he ordered overnight, strapped to trees along the line without Daniel's say-so. And Daniel found them and took some down, and they argued. The first real argument, and Daniel let him keep 2 of them aimed at the food line on the condition that he did nothing else, that he only watched. The cameras got footage, distant footage, the thing at the line at night, eating exactly as it had for 11 years. And for Tommy, that was not proof. That was a teaser. He looked at his grainy, distant clips of the most extraordinary thing on the planet, and all he could see was how much bigger it would be if the shot were closer. He started talking about it like a project, like a launch, mapping out how he would release it, how he would not put out the distant stuff at all, how he would wait and get the close shot, the clean daylight close-up, the thing that would change his life. He stopped helping Daniel with the property work he had been brought up there to do. He spent his days editing the distant clips, slowing them down, zooming in until the creature dissolved into a smear of pixels. And he spent his evenings out at the line in a folding chair with the good camera in his lap, waiting, getting closer to the woodshed each night by a few feet, the way Daniel himself had once crept the food a few feet farther out. Except Daniel had been moving toward trust, and Tommy was moving toward a thing that does not survive being moved toward. Daniel told him no. Daniel told him no in every way he had. He told him about the month the creature disappeared, the one time Daniel himself had taken a single step toward it. He told him it would not just leave, it would leave forever. 11 years gone over one bad morning. He took Tommy out to the line one evening in daylight and tried to make him feel it instead of hear it. Tried to make him understand that the arrangement was a living thing with a temper and a memory. That it was not a wildlife feeder, that there was a person on the other end of it who had agreed to terms. And Tommy stood there and listened, and Daniel thought, for one night, that it had landed. But what Tommy had heard, going back through it later, was confirmation that the payoff was even bigger than he had thought. A person, an intelligent one, a relationship. That was not a reason to stop. That was the whole story, the thing that would make the video more than a blurry monster clip. And Daniel had handed it to him. And Tommy heard all of it and went out anyway 3 nights later and baited the line himself with the good camera already running and crept toward it in the dark, trying to have the distance. And the creature broke and ran and did not come back the next night or the night after. Daniel found out the next morning, found Tommy's chair pulled 20 feet closer than it had any business being, and the dish moved with it, and they had the worst argument of the whole summer. Daniel shouting in a way I am told he almost never does. Tommy sullen and certain and already, behind his eyes, planning the next thing. And that was the thing that should have stopped Tommy, and instead it was the thing that fixed his mind. Because the creature went silent. 3 days, 4, no food taken, no notes traded in the dark, nothing. Daniel knew exactly what the silence was. It was the same silence as the month after his own single step, the withdrawal of a thing whose trust has been damaged. Daniel knew it might be permanent. He grieved it like a death, sat out those nights the way he had years before, the food going untouched, the 3 notes he whistled into the dark coming back to him not at all. But Tommy did not read the silence as withdrawal. Tommy read it as a problem to be solved. He decided the creature had simply moved its range, gone deeper, across the creek onto the federal side where Daniel had never followed it. And he decided that if it would not come to the line anymore, then he would go find it. He stopped sleeping. He pored over Daniel's notebook and the trail cam footage looking for a pattern, a direction, a place to intercept. He pulled the trail cameras off the line near the house and moved them down toward the creek, trying to catch which way it crossed. And one of them caught it once at the water's edge before dawn. And that single clip of the thing actually at the creek, actually crossing onto the federal land, was the thing that decided him. He had a direction now. He packed the good camera, the real one, not the trail cams, and he made his plan. And on the surface, he was bright and easy about it, the way that frightened Daniel most, because Daniel by then knew the kid was past listening. The last night, Daniel tried one more time. He stood in the doorway of the room Tommy was staying in, and he told him plainly that if he crossed that creek, he might not come back. That whatever was over there had been pushed for 2 weeks straight and had nothing left to give. That the rule had a reason. And Tommy smiled at him and said something about how Daniel had been alone up here too long and rolled over, and that was the last full conversation the two of them ever had. The morning it happened was a Tuesday in late August. I know it was a Tuesday because Daniel has said the word Tuesday to me more times than any man should have to say a word. It was early, gray, the light not yet through the trees. Daniel woke to find Tommy already gone from the house and the good camera gone with him. And he knew. He went out the back and up the slope at a run, calling. No answer. And the dew was knocked off the grass in a line that led him straight toward the water. He saw Tommy down at the creek, already across it, already on the federal side, moving up into the trees on the far bank, with the camera up at his eye, filming as he went, narrating to himself the way he did, doing the exact thing the entire 11 years had been built on never doing. Daniel went down to the water. He has told me he stopped at the water, and I have never asked him why he stopped, because I think the answer is that some part of him knew that crossing it himself, fast, loud, in pursuit, was the most dangerous thing two men could do at once. And so he stood on his own bank and he called across to Tommy to stop, to come back, to put the camera down. And Tommy on the far bank turned to call something back to him, something cocky, something about the shot, about how Daniel should come see this. And over Tommy's shoulder, up the slope behind him, the trees moved. This is the part Daniel told me only once, all the way through, the night he finally let me see the tape, and I am going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, no more and no less, because I was not there, and I will not pretend to fill in what I did not see. Daniel says the thing came down the slope without hurrying. That is what he keeps returning to, that it did not charge, did not crash, that it came down toward Tommy at a walk, the same unhurried fold through the trees walk it had used to leave him on a snowy night 11 years before, except now it was coming the other way, toward. And Tommy had his back to it and was still talking to Daniel across the water and did not yet know. Daniel says he opened his mouth to shout a warning, and at that same moment he heard it, the sound in the water to his right, a heavy, deliberate movement in the creek itself downstream of him, close, and the trained part of him after 11 years snapped his head toward the sound on instinct, because in 11 years the thing had only ever been in one place at a time, and his whole body believed it could not be both up the far slope and in the water beside him at once. 30 seconds. He has counted them out for me. The time his eyes were off his cousin, chasing a sound in the water that when he looked, showed him nothing, just the creek running gray over the stones. He heard Tommy's voice change behind him, heard it go from cocky to something else, mid-word, a single rising sound that was not quite a word and not quite a scream, heard the camera, and he whipped back around toward the far bank. And the far bank was empty. No Tommy, no movement in the trees, the slope above the creek exactly as still as it had been a minute before, as if nothing had ever stood on it. And down in the leaves at the edge of the water on the far side, the good camera lying where it had fallen, the little red light still on, still recording the empty forest. Daniel crossed then. Of course he crossed. He crossed the creek for the first time in 11 years, and he went up that slope and he searched until his voice was gone. And there was nothing. No Tommy, no blood. He was always clear about that. No sign of the kind of thing you would expect. No struggle written on the ground, no trail. Just a camera in the leaves and a silence over the whole forest like a held breath. He picked up the camera and he carried it back across the water, and that, in the only way that matters, was the end of my cousin Tommy. What followed was the part the world saw, the only part the world saw, and it was nothing like the truth. Daniel called it in. He told the sheriff that his cousin had gone out alone in the early morning to film wildlife and had not come back. Every word of that was true, and none of it was the truth. The search ran for 3 weeks. They brought dogs, and the dogs took the scent down to the creek and across it and up the far slope, and then lost it cold in a place where a scent does not just stop. They brought a helicopter for 2 days. They walked grids through that forest with the kind of care you only see when a young man is missing. And they found nothing because there was nothing to find. And after 3 weeks, the active search became a recovery, and the recovery became a cold case. And the official story settled into the shape these stories always settle into. A city kid, inexperienced, went into rough country alone, got lost, fell somewhere, drowned in a runoff channel, was carried off, was never recovered. A tragedy, a cautionary tale. Case open, pending discovery of remains, and Daniel said nothing. He sat in those interview rooms and he answered every question, and he never once said the thing he knew, because what was there to say? That his cousin was taken across a creek by a person 7 feet tall that he had been feeding for 11 years. He understood that the truth would not save Tommy, who was past saving, and would only cost Daniel his land, his name, his liberty maybe, and would loose every camera and gun in the state on the thing he had spent a decade protecting. So he held the truth the way he had held the secret all those years, alone, and it closed over him, and he stopped being able to talk about that summer at all. He did not tell me. Not for years. I knew Tommy had vanished. The whole family knew. We grieved him in the abstract way you grieve a young man lost in the woods. I did not know my brother had watched it happen from across a creek until 8 years later, 3 months ago, when something arrived that made him decide I had to know. And he sat me down and he took the tape out of the bottom drawer. I have watched it. I need to be honest about what is on it and what is not, because the not is the whole reason I can still sleep at all. The camera fell facing up the slope. For most of its length, it shows nothing but the empty forest on the federal side, the trees, the leaf litter, the gray morning light, and over the top of all of it, Daniel's voice from across the water, hoarse, calling Tommy's name long after there is any Tommy to call it to. That is most of the tape, a man calling into trees that do not answer. But there are a few seconds near the beginning before the camera came to rest, where it is still in Tommy's hands and pointed up the slope. And in those seconds you can see the thing that came down to him. And I'm not going to describe it to you frame by frame, though I could, because Daniel asked me one thing when he gave me the tape, and that thing was that I never described those few seconds to anyone. What I will tell you is this: it did not look the way you would expect an attack to look. There was no rage in it. The face, the wide, flat, almost human face with the torn left ear, the same individual, the same mind, 11 years of the same returning person, was not the face of an animal taking prey. I have gone over those seconds more times than is good for me. And the closest I can come, the only word my whole skeptic's vocabulary will give me, is that it looked like a thing that had finally understood it was being hunted by the one kind of creature that had never hunted it here, and had decided in that morning that it was done being patient. That is all I will say about the tape. They are still searching for Tommy. That is the thing I keep coming back to. 8 years on, the case has never been closed, because you cannot close a case with no remains, and so once or twice a year, a couple of people from the county still walk a stretch of that forest, still poke through the runoff channels, still look in the wrong place for the wrong thing, hoping to find bones that are not there to be found. The family has stopped expecting it. My aunt, Tommy's mother, kept hope the longest, kept it for years, and even she, the last time I spoke to her, did not say the word find anymore. We have all of us quietly stopped believing he will ever be found, and not one of us can make ourselves say that out loud, and so the searching goes on, smaller every year, more a ritual than a hope. Daniel knows they are looking in the wrong place for the wrong thing. He has known for 8 years. He says nothing the way he has always said nothing, and he carries it. The horror in this, if there is horror in this, is not the creature. I have had 3 months to sit with that, and I am sure of it now. The creature kept a rule for 11 years. It was my cousin who could not keep one. The real horror is that Tommy looked at a person, an actual returning mind that had chosen my brother and trusted him for over a decade, and saw a trophy, saw views, saw a shot that would change his life, and decided that this person's 11 years of trust were his to spend in one Tuesday morning. He treated a someone like a something, and the woods do not forgive that, it turns out, the way we forgive it down here. Did it come back? I know that is a question because it was my question too. I asked Daniel the night he gave me the tape whether after all of that the thing ever returned to the line. He did not answer me directly. He just said that he still sets food out past the woodshed some nights, the way he has for 19 years now, and that he does not always check in the morning whether it is gone because there are some mornings he would rather not know. I have decided not to ask him anything more than that. The thing that came in the mail 3 months ago, the thing that made Daniel finally show me the tape and made me finally tell you all of this, I am not going to describe either. It is enough to say that it convinced both of us that the silence we had kept was a kind of lie we could no longer afford, and that someone somewhere should hear the truth of what happened to Tommy, even if no one can ever prove a word of it. So that is the truth, for whatever it is worth, from the one person who has watched the tape all the way through. My brother fed a person in the woods for 11 years. My cousin tried to film that person up close. And on a Tuesday morning in late August, across a creek my brother will not cross again, my cousin vanished off the face of the earth and left nothing behind but a camera in the leaves with the red light still on. They are still looking for him. They will not find him. And the tape stays in the drawer. Real or fake? You decide. Then tell me in the comments what you would have done with that camera if it had been your hand that picked it up out of the leaves. I will leave it there for tonight.